It is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer here to react. A breaking news podcast to the news that Ravens defensive coordinator Mike McDonald is leaving to become the new head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. We will break down what this news means for the Ravens, go through some potential replacements, as well as who could go with Mike McDonald on his way to Seattle. All that and more coming up. But first, let's get a quick word from our sponsors.
If you have an appetite for saving money, then you should get the Rofo Rewards app from Royal Farms. Use the Rofo Rewards app to place mobile orders for pickup or delivery and earn royalty points to redeem for free stuff. And right now, new Rofo Rewards members will get a free any-size coffee for signing up. You can download the Rofo Rewards app at the Apple App Store or Google Play today. You'll find it's a very appealing app to have. Real fresh, real fast. Royal Farms.
The CIAA Men's and Women's Basketball Tournament is February 26th through March 3rd at CFG Bank Arena. Baltimore is bringing the hoops, the culture, and the energy. So grab your tickets now and book your hotel at baltimore.org/CIAA.
All right, Jonas. So Mike McDonald, the mastermind of the Ravens defense, perhaps the best defense in the NFL, led the league in sacks, led the league in points allowed, led the league in takeovers. We knew this was a possibility. There were 8 head coaching vacancies to be filled this offseason. As they were dwindling, more and more coaches were getting hired, more and more head men were being named around the league. We thought, oh, maybe there's a chance Mike McDonald will sneak through. But we were kidding ourselves. He was too good a candidate to be staying in Baltimore as the defensive coordinator for his 3rd year in a row.
Yeah, only one team gets the luck of keeping their insanely prodigious coordinator. It's Detroit. It's not the Ravens. I guess we should not be surprised. I think we maybe got caught up in all of these positions slowly being filled one by one. You see Dave Canales land a head coaching job, and you're like, wow, maybe the Ravens will actually end up rolling, snake eyes on this. But I guess the reporting came out that Seattle was willing to wait until after the Super Bowl if the Ravens had gone there to possibly see if Mike McDonald was their man. And it's not a surprise that he knocked their socks off because, you see the Ian Rappaport, report about how he was just a very, very impressive guy in all these interviews. And it's not a surprise. I mean, you look at his resume, graduated with honors from Georgia, went to, got his master's as he was being a GA, graduated with like a 4.0, has a certificate in leadership experience. At every single step that he has climbed the ranks faster than pretty much anyone, would expect. So a very polished guy, very smart guy, collegial, personable, from talking to him, for about 30 minutes a couple of weeks ago, makes you feel like the most important guy in the world. And if, he's doing that with a, no-name reporter, I can't imagine just the kind of energy and vibrancy and buoyancy that he would bring to an NFL front office interview room as he's trying to sell himself on why he should be the head coach for one of the, there are only 32 jobs. And I'm sure he brought his A game to that Seattle interview, just like he brought his A game to every other interview he was going through. He's just a very, very impressive individual and, only 36 years old. So the best years are we think, ahead of him.
Don't sell yourself short as a no-name reporter, Jonas. Your resume sounds awfully similar to Mike McDonald's resume. Top of your class, all of these athletes.
For peanuts coming out of college.
Yeah, both led top-tier defensive units, No, this is he has been incredibly impressive throughout the season. Like you said, Jonas, not just with what he's done with this Ravens defense, but also just how he's carried himself, how he's been a leader. We thought in the first half of that game against the Chiefs, when the Chiefs come right down and score touchdowns on their first 2 possessions, we thought, oh boy, are we getting a little bit of, an early Jonathan Gannon effect here, where he has been interviewing with these teams. He's focused on other things. He's not locked in on the game plan. And then guess what? He did what he does and had done in his 2 years in Baltimore, and that's adjust perfectly. That is fix the holes in the defense, that is figure out what the Chiefs were doing, and then have his Ravens defense pitch a shutout in the second half and keep the Ravens single-handedly in that game, and it should not have been a one-score game. The fact that they were able to hold the Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and Andy Reid and everything that they have going for him to 17 points in a playoff game was putting the finishing touches, I think, on a phenomenal resume for him. But, just to run through quickly what he brings to the table for Seattle, he had an incredible defense in Baltimore. He was in Baltimore for 7 years and goes to Michigan to be their defensive coordinator. So goes from one Harbaugh to the other. Has a good
Dramatic
year.
turnaround.
Yeah. Has a good year with them. Comes right back to Baltimore as the defensive coordinator in 2022. Good defense last year, especially in the second half of the year. They really turned things on with the addition of Roquan Smith, sort of unlocked everything in their defense. And then this year, they blow the doors off of the NFL. They hold great offenses, I should say, to minimal points. And they become this kind of Shanahan stopper. This Shanahan tree seems to be poisoned at the roots anytime Mike Macdonald gets his hands on it.
Yeah, I mean was the biggest argument, I think, for Seattle getting someone like McDonald, and shouted from the rooftops by Seahawks fans like me at times, of course. But you look at what offenses are up against, what defenses are up against, rather, in that NFC West. It's a whole lot of very, very smart offensive coordinators. You got Sean McVay with the Rams. You got Kyle Shanahan with the 49ers. You need someone who has answers, and the Ravens this year had answers. The Rams less so, but that was a game where I think Kyle Hamilton left a little bit early. What was never really the same. We know the kind of on and off splits with Kyle Hamilton, but this is a defense that was aggressive without losing sight of the bigger picture. They could draw up pressures without needing to send more than 4 or 5 guys. They were terrific against preset motion. We know that is a feature of Shanahan offenses. They were terrific against screens. We know that is a feature of Shanahan offenses. They were good against play action. Again, another feature of Shanahan offenses. So if that is becoming the prevailing offensive meta in the NFL, why wouldn't you want someone like McDonald? If you're willing to take a risk on him being able to find, someone who can run that offense capably. And obviously that is the big trade-off in all this. Are you willing to take a risk on someone like McDonald if it means that you're not getting your own Kyle Shanahan, if it means that you're getting someone who's going to lead this team, your team, for the foreseeable future, and not have to worry about any of that turnover at offensive coordinator? But we have seen, you look at what DeMeco Ryans was able to do in Houston. I think a guy who in a lot of ways is maybe the best comp for Mike Macdonald, because he had incredible success with that 49ers defense, well regarded as a culture guy, comes into Houston, turns that thing around. Obviously, they hit on the most important part of the equation, which is the quarterback. But you get a culture guy, you get a guy who knows what he's doing defensively. You get someone who can build up that program. And how many coaches, how many franchises around the league right now would trade their guy for what DeMeco Ryans is establishing right now in Houston? So if he can be the white DeMeco Ryans, then I think everyone in Seattle will be pretty happy.
Yeah, I mean, he fits Seattle to a T, I think, as well, because you saw the success that they had under Pete Carroll. I know Pete Carroll came from the college ranks, but he had also had some NFL success in the past, but he was a culture setter and led some pretty incredible defenses as well in Seattle. And that offense seems to be already pretty set with Geno Stone at quarterback. So he has his quarterback there. It seems like they have a pretty high floor on offense, and maybe the unit that they can push to be elite. In the NFL, you always want one elite unit and maybe the other one to be passable. And they're banking on Mike Macdonald to raise the ceiling of that defense. So offense should be, 15 to 10 maybe in the league. But if Mike Macdonald can get that defense close to where he got the Baltimore Ravens defense, then that will be a gamble that will pay off for Seattle. And you look around the league at some of the other coaches that are hired. You mentioned, Jonas, how there is a trend towards offensive coaches, but we've seen some defensive minds as well. Falcons hiring Raheem Morris, Patriots obviously going with Gerard Mayo. So there has been an interesting maybe shift back, regression towards the mean in terms of defensive coaches getting the, publicity, the hires, the raises, the jobs that they deserve.
Yeah, that there are only so many guys that you can trust to be in that 1% of offensive play callers. Not every guy from the Shanahan tree is going to be a Shanahan, doppelganger. It's just as simple as that. So why not get someone who has ideas for all of this? Why not get someone who can dream up pressures on third down, on fourth down? Why not get someone who has this just intuitive understanding of how to keep offenses off balance? There was a great story in the Ringer last week by Ben Solak, just looking at how the answer to motion, which is such a problem for so many defenses, is to use that motion as a defense in your favor. So think of all the perfectly timed, creepers or simulated pressures or blitzes by guys like Patrick Queen, Kyle Hamilton, Arthur Millette, who are using the motion from, the receiver, the running back, the tight end, whomever, to time up their own blitz and to throw a wrench in the offense's plans. And that was something that was not really a feature under Wink Martindale. And that's a credit to Mike Macdonald, because that is something that he's able to notice, he's able to innovate upon, iterate upon, and say, you have one thing, well, we have this counterpunch that is going to completely mess you up. So that is a huge, huge asset for any team. That was something that Steve Spagnuolo, unfortunately for the Ravens, was able to use against the Ravens and other teams this year. And it's just, something that you have to have in that arsenal if you want to be a successful, modern 21st century defense.
Before we talk about some assistants who could go with Mike Macdonald to Seattle, let's talk about a hypothetical situation. I venture to say it's close to conspiracy theory level of hopeful situation for Ravens fans. This scenario in which Ravens fans and the Ravens would fire John Harbaugh and make Mike Macdonald their head coach. This would never happen. And I think that a lot of fans who were touting this, who were mentioning this on social media, I heard from somebody else who worked for the Banner who is bringing this up with me and asking if this was a possibility and saying, I know it's kind of crazy, but here's what I'm kind of hoping that they do. Obviously, it was never going to happen. There are a lot of reasons, myriad reasons it was never going to happen, but it also just didn't make a whole lot of sense in my mind. Did it make any sense to you, Jonas?
If I were playing like Madden, sure, if I didn't have to worry about the reputation of my franchise, of my culture, my coaching culture, I guess I should say, it's the same reason, in college football, you can get away with firing a coach for, after one or two bad years, because you can just throw money at the next big guy. If you're an ACC power, SEC power, Big 12 power, whatever. In the NFL, it's a little bit different, I would say, because even though there are still, tens of millions of dollars being thrown around on these coaching contracts, you have to be mindful of the possibility that you are not just selling yourself as a franchise to the current coach you have on staff, but also to the next guy. Would the Eagles have had the Eagles fired Nick Sirianni, would it have made it tougher for them to find his replacement, because you are firing a guy who just a year ago was in the Super Bowl, and not just in the Super Bowl, but one or two plays away from winning the whole shebang. So I understand that there is a saying that, that we haven't won a Super Bowl since 2012. And frank, guys, I would say there are a lot of franchises around the league right now who would settle for that one Super Bowl in the last 11, 12 years. But, I know John Harbaugh isn't getting any older, or isn't getting any younger, but he has been a guy.
He isn't getting any older.
What
is he, Benjamin Buttoning?
you have to, have the faith that this guy, who has been one of the NFL's best head coaches for almost as long as he's been established himself. You ask anyone around the NFL who would be in their top 5 of head coaches, John Harbaugh would probably be in it. And yes, Mike Macdonald is a huge loss. No, I don't think that their successor is going to be able to succeed more impressively than Mike Macdonald, but you just have to keep in mind that there's a bigger picture here, and there are just some things you're going to have to be able to stomach that may be unpleasant now, but there is a business in the NFL, and you can't just dump one friend for another. You have to be mindful that there are far-reaching consequences for stuff like that.
Yeah, John Harbaugh has been incredibly successful in the NFL as this quote unquote CEO head coach, where he doesn't dig particularly deep into the offensive side. He doesn't dig particularly deep into the defensive side, but he is great at building a culture. He's great at hiring assistants like Mike Macdonald and like Todd Monken, who he brought in this year, because the ability to consistently replace assistant coaches when they get hired elsewhere is a skill, and it is difficult to do. And he has proven the ability to do that time in and time out. And he just has a much, much longer track record. You can quibble with results from year to year, but there was just no way that the Ravens were going to replace their head coach who just got them to the AFC Championship game and hosted an AFC Championship game at M&T Bank Stadium for the first time ever. They were not going to replace him with his defensive coordinator who has no head coaching experience and expect Mike Macdonald to be able to take over and, for essentially a Ravens legend at this point. So that was just never going to happen.
And it's tough. It's tough for John, because I think the most amazing thing, about what this Ravens defense was able to do this year is, we talked about it. Defenses are so much more variable than offenses, because defenses do not have that centerpiece figure who is the lodestone, who is going to be the most consistent part of your game every day. Roquan Smith had some great games this year, and he had some bad games this year. And when he had some bad games this year, the defense suffered. When it's Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson, yes, they how their performance is tied to the offensive success in general, but because of just how often they're involved with touching the ball, the ball goes through them every single play, like Morgan Moses told me, more often than not, the most talented quarterbacks are going to lift that offense up to a level that feels sustainable. With Mike leaving, with the depth of this defense leaving, with just probably some of the bad injury luck that the Ravens might encounter next year, I think that it's kind of a no-win territory for whoever steps into this role. It should be a very talented defense. We can talk about that later. But I just think that you are basically walking into a situation where this defense is almost destined to take a step back, maybe two steps back. And if Mike Macdonald gets that defense cooking in Seattle, and Geno Smith and that offense can continue to kind of hum the way it did at the end of this past season, then you're going to have a lot of folks looking and comparing, rightly or wrongly, what's happening in Baltimore to what's happening in Seattle. And that's going to be an uncomfortable conversation. And, frankly, there's no one who can really answer it, because Steve Bisciotti does not talk to media, and Eric DeCosta does not have that kind of say over who stays and who goes at the coaching roles.
You almost said Geno Stone, didn't you? Yeah, it's the Geno versus Geno thing that we had when the Ravens and Seahawks played earlier in the year.
We will get, though, now, I assume, a Mike Macdonald versus Mike McDaniel matchup, which will just be hell for everyone in NFL media.
True. Will we get a Mike Macdonald versus Mike McCarthy matchup?
Probably.
I have no idea who's on the Seahawks schedule.
If we could find a way to, if you could find a way to get all three, has an NFL game ever been played with three teams? Let's invent it, just so we can get a Mike Mac versus Mike Mac versus Mike Mac.
Let's make it happen.
By the way, on that note, when I was interviewing Mike Macdonald a couple weeks ago, I asked him, just because I'm a goofball, whether his similarity to Mike McDaniel's name had ever been an inconvenience or an asset to his career, and he said no. So there you go.
There you go. Well, he did. I was really worried when you asked him if he had seen the memes about the Ravens fans trying to throw out some fake news, some slander, all as a joke. to try to get him to not leave Baltimore and try to get teams to not hire him as their head coach. If he had seen any of that, I was really concerned he would just give you the strangest look. But he knew what you were talking about. His wife had sent him some.
Yeah, it turns out that I guess the Seahawks front office doesn't have Twitter, so good for them. They're probably living in a much healthier world than we are right now.
Had they had Twitter, we're online as much as we are, maybe they wouldn't have fired him. Jonas, the conversation of who could replace Mike Macdonald in Baltimore and the conversation of who could go with Mike Macdonald to Seattle, there's some overlap here. This Venn diagram has a little bit of a center portion here, because you look at a lot of the assistants on Mike Macdonald's staff, and we'll get into individually each of them. Anthony Weaver, Chris Hewitt, Denard Wilson, Zachary Orr. All those guys could be seen as potential defensive coordinators for the Ravens, but by the same token, maybe they end up following Mike Macdonald to Seattle and becoming either the defensive coordinator there or getting some kind of promotion to be on his staff.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think that the big domino here is Anthony Weaver, because with Ben Johnson, who was for weeks linked to that Commander's job, seen as the front runner, with him pulling out and preferring to stay in Detroit and work with Dan Campbell, it seems like there's more buzz now for Weaver getting that job. I don't know if he's the favorite. I don't know if he's top two, but he's definitely in the running now. And I would imagine that he would be, the Vegas favorite if that Washington job weren't in the picture for ascending to the defensive coordinator spot, because he's already the assistant head coach, because he already has play calling experience. He was the defensive play caller in Houston a couple of years ago. Did not go well for him, but that Texans team was not especially talented. So I think that is the big domino here. We're supposed to talk to John and Eric in 2 days' time. Typically, they do not, hold that presser unless the big picture, the big pieces of the coaching staff are in place. Maybe there will still be some movement here and there with the assistant coaches, but I would imagine that the Ravens knew that this was probably a likelihood that Mike Macdonald would be leaving, and that hopefully they would have a succession plan in place by Friday, but maybe not.
So Denard Wilson, I think, is a good candidate as well for defensive coordinator in Baltimore. Defensive backs coach right now. He's born in Hyattsville, played safety at the University of Maryland. He's got a lot of good experience and has been the defensive backs coach for the Jets and the Eagles before coming to the Ravens. I think Zachary Orr is a good candidate, inside linebackers coach. Obviously, he was handed some great talent in Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen, but both those guys have become Pro Bowls this year. And the coaches have to bear some kind of, receive some kind of credit for that as well. Chris Hewitt is the passing game coordinator and secondary coach, an interesting former player, spent 3 years in the NFL, was forced into early retirement. He was born in Jamaica, I should say. So a lot of interesting candidates here on their own staff. But Jonas, you also wrote about on the BaltimoreBanner.com 3 external candidates: Jesse Minter, Danton Lynn, and Leslie Frazier. What about those 3 candidates sticks out to you?
Yeah, Minter is the interesting one because he has those connections to the Ravens. He was the defensive backs coach who was hired, I believe, to replace who was it? Whatever. Sorry. Danton Lynn was the guy who was hired to replace Jesse Minter after he left for Michigan. But, Jesse Minter has a familiarity with the Ravens, with Harbaugh. His dad, Jesse Minter's dad, actually used to be the head coach at Cincinnati and retained John Harbaugh as a assistant coach back in the 90s. So that there is that familial connection, but also there is just that experience actually in the Ravens facility. A arc not unlike Mike Macdonald's, a defense also not unlike Mike Macdonald's. This was a defense that was even better, the Wolverines defense, even better than Mike Macdonald's defense at Michigan a couple of years ago. Probably more talented, but a lot of simulated pressures, a lot of creepers, great coverage in the back end. Probably not as talented up front, which is saying something. They were able to be as successful as they were, but they finished number one in efficiency. If you look at the ESPN Football Power Index, he has been linked to the Chargers defensive coordinator job, obviously following Jim Harbaugh to LA. There was some reporting from Michigan reporters about how he told the team that he was set to leave Michigan and explore opportunities in the NFL. And I think people put two and two together that he was following Jim Harbaugh. But I have the Chargers push notifications on my phone. Have not seen anything other than just a lot of tweets about Joe Ortiz. Maybe they're waiting to get every one of those coordinators finalized before they kind of shoot out a group text announcing everything. But if the Ravens were not to hire in-house, I think Jesse Minter would be a really obvious candidate because of so much of what he brought to Michigan, and his own trajectory as a coach is so closely aligned with what Mike McDonald brought to the Ravens after his own year away, after his Rumspringa at Michigan, before coming back to Baltimore.
So you mentioned the fact that John Harbaugh is going to have his season-ending press conference on Friday, and we will be there in Owings Mills. You don't expect news about a replacement to come before then, do you?
Probably not. I don't know. Maybe it's tough to tell. Just if they were expecting Mike to leave, then I imagine they probably have already started the wheels in motion for who could be next. I don't, if the Ravens are interviewing four guys, not Minter, Zach Orr, Denard Wilson, Chris Hewitt, Anthony Weaver, then that would probably take more than a couple days. And that if they want to name Weaver as the replacement, then they have to also figure out what the heck is happening in Washington. If he's your guy, then you don't want to make a rash decision, because it's not like, Chris Hewitt interviewed for the Jaguars defensive coordinator job, but that went to the Falcons, fired defensive coordinator. So there's not really a whole lot of urgency there. But a guy like Denard Wilson, in the mix for jobs, Zach Orr, now being requested to interview with the Packers. So I would imagine that it's probably unlikely that they have something lined up by 11 a.m. on Friday, but maybe we could get a better sense from John on just where they're leaning.
We will have full coverage of that press conference on the BaltimoreBanner.com. At Jonas_Shaffer is his Twitter handle. I am at Paul Mancano. Gianna Hahn also writing some great stuff, as well as Kyle Goon. And we will have a podcast shortly after that press conference as well, hoping to go live and take your comments and your reactions to that as well. But the big news today, Mike McDonald heading to Seattle, and the Ravens lose their defensive mastermind, and not just the free agents that they got to worry about replacing. Now they have to worry about replacing their defensive coordinator. So, Jonas, a lot still left to be done before the Ravens can even get into the bulk of this offseason and approach free agency and approach the draft. There's so much still that has to happen here.
They got to find a guy who fills the quota of Jim Carrey quotes too. Who's going to make jokes about from Dumb and Dumber? Who's going to talk about big gulps? Huh?
Yeah. Who's going to talk to no-name reporters?
We're wearing black. This was not planned. We usually find ourselves wearing the same color, and I think that black today is an appropriate tone, considering just what we in the Ravens media are losing, and also what Ravens fans are losing with Mike McDonald headed off to Seattle.
Don't lie to the audience. We texted last night about what we were wearing. Come on. That just about does it for the Banner Ravens podcast here. For Jonas Shaffer, I'm Paul Mancano. Please like, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you give us a good review, we will read it out here on the podcast, and we will have another episode for you coming this Friday. For Jonas Shaffer,